brainstormed this idea around a mastermind group. And really my passions are around personal growth and accountability. And really, how do we get the most out of ourselves? How do we find happiness? How do we find meaning in life?
Officially welcome back to the Life and Business Hack Show, you guys. Today, I am your host, the real Stephen Corcoran. And man, do I have a man, the myth, the legend on the show today for you guys. I have a guest with me today. I look to him as a friend. I look to him as a mentor. And he's also has done so much in such a little amount of time. I want to introduce Jared to you guys here.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for having me, my friend. I'm just honored to be here. And I want to give you kudos for all the work you've done on this show. And I know you're impacting a lot of people, so I'm just grateful to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words. Now, Jared, I want people to get to know you a little bit. Now, you weren't always an entrepreneur, were you? You just recently just got into this. So I think like your perspective, especially with people right now starting a business, I think is super valuable. So just talk about how we met, because I'm a part of your mastermind group and you run an amazing business with entrepreneur men, like specifically. Can you dive a little bit into what is Strive?
Yeah, well, you gave me lots of compliments there. So thank you. I don't know how far along on that journey I really am. I think that I've got a whole lot to learn. And like you said, I'm very new. Like I come from the health background. I'm not an entrepreneur. I really just started on this journey about a year ago. And that's how, Steve, you and I met, is that I was trying to upgrade my friend. I don't want to say upgrade my friend group, but I was trying to get around people that were like-minded and people that were making a difference. And so we came across each other and really through rock climbing is kind of how we met, and ice climbing. And from that, I learned a whole lot from you about sales and marketing, and through conversations with you and Eric and some other people that you knew, we kind of brainstormed this idea around a mastermind group. And really my passions are around personal growth and accountability. And really, how do we get the most out of ourselves? How do we find happiness? How do we find meaning in life? And out of that kind of confusion arose this idea for Strive. And Strive is, like you said, it's a mastermind group for male entrepreneurs. And we meet once a week and we set goals and hold each other accountable. And really importantly, we create this community. And now during the pandemic, I think what we found is that community is really what's getting a lot of us through these kind of challenging times.
Well, I think 100% of what you said there is like so true. It's like, it's very hard nowadays, especially as an entrepreneur, because it's usually self-isolation. Like you usually are doing it alone and you're looking for somebody to hold you accountable, because in entrepreneurship, you wear so many different hats that you're like, I got to do this project. I got to do this project. I got to do this. But who's really holding you accountable? And I see that because I'm part of the group, and I can tell you I get at least 100 times more stuff done being a part of that and having you on my back. Be like, hey, get to work, get shit done. I'm like, okay, it's time to go. I think that's...
Yeah, and just to add on to that, like I think it's isolation on top of isolation. Like entrepreneurship, like you said, is an isolating environment to operate in. And given the pandemic, we're all operating in isolation times two. Literally isolation, and then you're the top of your business, you're trying to create something from scratch, you're pushing an idea forward. And that just becomes harder in these circumstances, I think.
No, that's a very good point. My question, I'd like to go back, because obviously you just recently got into this. What was like the pivot point that you're like, you know what, this 9-to-5 job isn't for me? And what were like some tell signs that you realized there was more to this, like the meaning behind it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And I think that what I noticed from the Strive group is that all of us kind of have a similar story where we feel, and we've always felt like we have something more to contribute to the world. Mm-hmm. I think from a young age, I think a lot of us felt like we had something to offer. We had value to add. And it's not from a selfish perspective. It was more from a I want to make the world a better place. I want to leave some kind of legacy or mark on this world. And I want to do what I can to help. And so I've always felt that way, but expressed it in many different ways. Like for example, I was in my last year of university, I started this project. It was a charitable project because a friend had just returned from the Philippines, and he told me that him and his brothers had built a basketball court on a community called Smoky Mountain. And Smoky Mountain is in Manila. It's a garbage dump, and literally 30,000 people lived there at one time. And so he told me about this, and I was just so moved to do something that, it's small retrospectively, but it's interesting how sometimes looking back, these kind of small things were pivot points. And so for me, I kind of dug my teeth into this project where I collected sports equipment and sent it over to the Philippines. And I was literally a hoarder. Like in my college dorm room, I had 400 basketballs. I had 200 pairs of running shoes. I had 150 pairs or 150 jerseys and like a couple thousand pieces of equipment, because these kids, like, they love sports, and that was kind of the release. And so interestingly, like, I look back in this project, it was kind of small and probably didn't have that much of an impact. But for me, it was like, I think that was the moment that I look back and I think, geez, like, I really loved that. I got a lot of meaning out of it. And maybe that kind of transitions into the bigger discussion on, a search for meaning that I think we're all trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it on the head. We were talking before this about meaning and what meaning means to, like, everybody in different capacities. And I think you have an interesting twist on it, a different psychology, because everybody's searching for it. And it's hard to find something you're searching for. It's almost like the chicken before the egg. And I know just because I know you pretty well, we met ice climbing for the first time, and I was instantly drawn to this guy. I was like, man, this guy is so cool. He's so informative and he's so intelligent. He won't tell you this, but I'll tell you guys, this guy is brilliant. Tap into this guy. He says he doesn't know a lot, but he's actually a master of all trades almost. He won't agree to it. But one thing I would like to know is, in searching for meaning, like, how would somebody go about even like trying to accomplish this huge task, this daunting task to ourselves? Like, I know we've talked about it a few times, but I think the listeners would love to hear kind of how that process even started.
So I think, if you don't look back on yourself and feel embarrassed, I think that's kind of a common saying. Like, if you don't look back on yourself from a year ago and feel embarrassed, you're not growing enough. Well, I look back a month ago and I was embarrassed. So the search for meaning for me kind of became all consuming. And I look back and I'm a little bit embarrassed, to be truthful, because I really put the search for meaning above everything else. And it actually led to me getting, depressed and really sad, because I think that finding meaning is really difficult. And to give you an analogy from something that I've learned just recently, is that, like, if you take a movie, for example, you really don't get the meaning of the movie until the very last image, right? But a movie is made up of thousands of individual frames, just like our lives are made up of thousands of individual moments. The meaning isn't exemplified just in one big overarching picture. What I learned is that really I need to make meaning in each moment. And that can be something as simple as going for a run. Maybe going for a run brings me a whole lot of happiness. And, that is in itself finding meaning in that moment. And that's kind of led to a bigger goal for me, which is to run my first ultra marathon. Like, I've never run in my life. The most I've ever run is 10 kilometers. And I've got a goal for in 2 months to run an ultra marathon, my first ultra marathon. And
wow, that's a big daunting goal.
Yeah. And that came out of this search for meaning. I reread a book called A Man's Search for Meaning, or Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl. And it details the story of a psychologist during World War II. And he was stuck in a concentration camp in some of the worst conditions in human history. And he researched what makes meaning for people in even those most difficult circumstances. And one thing that really stood out for me, Steve, was that you can find meaning even in struggle. And there has to be meaning in struggle. And so that is actually, in combination with finding meaning in every moment, it's to find meaning in struggle. And the ultra marathon is going to be a struggle, and training for it is going to be a struggle. But I have a bigger meaning, and that is, giving me purpose and giving me a whole lot of happiness. And one thing that kind of we've spoken about before and has really resonated, I think, with both of us, is that a search for meaning and a search for happiness are counterproductive. Like the more you try and pursue meaning, the more you try and pursue happiness, the further away it gets. And so I think we get stuck in these idealistic big ideas of happiness or meaning, but it's simpler than that. And I'm not a psychologist, but I do know that for me, I have become much happier when I've realized that I need to do things that make me happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at so many like individuals at different statuses and all that fun stuff that goes into it, it's like somebody who has nothing is the most happiest, and somebody with everything is unhappy. It's like, what actually goes into it? And you said a very important part there that I want to go back to, is finding happiness in every moment, really living to enjoy it. It's like a day-to-day, like we go to the grocery store or we go on a hike, but actually just taking a moment to appreciate that you can go walk into this grocery store, you can buy groceries for yourself, just having that moment of happiness to yourself. I think we overlook the small things that we get to do on a day-to-day, the privileges that we get to do. And it's just living in the moment more. And I think that's a super big tip to everybody. Is exactly what you said there. Love it, brother. My voice cracked. Whew. I think I want to like harp on one more thing with the meaning side of thing there, Jared, is like, I know you're a big advocate for trying a bunch of things. And the one thing you're really good at is finding out, reevaluating why that made you happy or why it didn't make you happy. And then you kind of broke it down into principles. You basically live your life through these principles, like in any emotion, any feeling. Would you like sharing with the audience kind of how you thought process? Let's say you hit a wall. What is, like, rather than being a reactionary and reacting to it, you have a step-by-step process on how you evaluate things and whether you should continue them or whether it's a learning, you learn from that and go to another thing. Would you like to dive a little bit into that? I know it.
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. So people may think I'm a bit of a robot for doing this. And I think it's a really hard thing to do. And I don't think most people would do it, because it's kind of there's a learning curve to it. And it's something that is a bit counterintuitive and it's a bit painful to go through. So I think you have to be a certain type of person to want to do it. I love tracking things, and this is just kind of falls in with that vein. And so, just like you said, Steve, I live my life by principles. And in the last 2 years, like I started this whole thing about 2 years ago, and I separate my life into two distinct categories. The first is before I used principles, and the second phase of my life is the post-principle world. And I think that this has changed my life in the most dramatic way of anything I've ever done. And it's hard to do. And I've fallen off the bandwagon and I've got back on. But I've created about 120 principles in that 2-year period. And just to kind of share, like, what are principles, because it sounds vague, but generally what it comes down to is this is an idea that's put forth by a guy named Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio founded the largest hedge fund in the world. And they've got, his company is called Bridgewater Associates. They've got this really unique culture that's all about being radically transparent and coming up with the best idea no matter what, and learning from failures and getting better, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote a book called Principles, and I've adapted that to my own life. And the idea is that we fail at things because of our own inherent characteristics. It's not some outside phenomenon. It's because we've made a mistake, and that has then led to failure. And so what happens is that you fail, you feel this pain, you don't know what it is, and then maybe you have a drink, right? And maybe it's a couple of drinks. And you make that pain go away. And drinking, I'm sure most of us have a drink or two now and then, but when it's used to, or when anything is used to mask that emotion, it's negative. So really what it comes down to is that you feel that pain, and instead of going through that normal human reaction, which is to say, I want to get rid of this pain as quickly as I can, what you do is you reflect on that pain. And so there's a formula. It's pain plus reflection equals progress. Pain plus reflection equals progress. And so all that means is that, Steve, let's say that I started Strive and it failed miserably. And in that moment of failure, what I do, and I do this, like I said, I've done this 120 times to come up with principles. And what I would do is I would reflect on, why did that happen? And so I come up with the emotion that I'm feeling. I come up with the reason that it happened. And then the principle is actually, what can I do in the future so that this doesn't happen again? And the really neat thing is that you code and categorize these things. I do it just in Excel. And what I've come to realize is that a lot of my failures were kind of falling into the same buckets. You know, for example, I don't have enough resilience. Another one is I'm not maybe mentally strong enough. I am too reactionary. And so what's really neat is that over time you get to understand yourself. And I think that a lot of us struggle with that reflection process. And I always hear people saying, I don't understand myself. I don't know why I did that. People always say we need to reflect, but I don't know how to do it. Well, the best way to learn is from failures. And kind of the moment when it really clicked for me, Steve, was it was in the first week of doing this. And prior to principles, I thought, geez, I'm somebody that loves to learn from failure. You know, I thought that, like most people, I can reflect on my failures and get better, and that I was okay failing. But it turns out that in that first week, I had this mind shift. And the mind shift was, I cannot wait to wake up today so that I can fail, because then I can learn. I can learn about myself. I can learn how to get better. I can learn how to grow. And I think that if somebody's sitting out there watching and they're thinking, I really love to fail, I would kind of counter you and say, do you wake up excited to fail? And if you don't wake up excited to fail, then this could actually really help you. Because I think it's hard to calibrate to know, do you really love to fail? Are you okay with failure? And I've seen the most massive growth personally, purely because of this pretty simple process.
Yeah. Well, it's getting excited about it. It's changing your perspective on a negative connotation. It's like, rather than, same with like why we go climbing, right? Because not many, the viewers are probably wondering, because we both ice climb, we both rock climb together. We're both terrified of heights. So, so why throw us up there? We do it because it makes us uncomfortable. And we know there's a glimmer of happiness when you get to the top. When you're at first, you're honestly just waiting to get to the next anchor, so then you're secure. But there's a gap in between that. You're uncomfortable and you're nervous. That's where your brain toughness has to come in. That's where your mental toughness. It's like, either I'm going to fall. If you're thinking you're going to fall, you're going to fall. So I know that you've come up with a way to like systemize your brain to a way that you're not, when you see something that's adversive or something that most people would shy away from, you've reprogrammed your brain to step into this new Jared to overcome these. And you've taught this concept to me as well. So when we're climbing, we climb a little harder now than when we first started. We're both terrified to fall, but now we're kind of okay with it. We're a little more sure about ourselves climbing. But you have a cool approach to new endeavors that I'd like to share with everybody. And I'll kind of hint to it, is you kind of step into like an alter ego. Would you like to dive into not your alter ego, but kind of like different areas of your life that you've focused and you've noticed a change from it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it was actually through Strive. It was one of our, what we call teachable moments. And so that's an opportunity for the guys to share something that has really impacted them and something that they think can impact the group. And so one of the members shared about the alter ego effect. And that's a book written by, I think the author's name is Dan Herman.
Todd Herman.
Todd Herman. Thank you. Yeah. So don't reach out to Dan Herman, because that guy doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But definitely get Todd Herman's book, The Alter Ego Effect, because it changed all of our lives in a really significant way. And when I think about the positive things that have happened in my life in the last couple of years, I think about principles. I think about a search for meaning. I think about the alter ego effect, because it really has had a massive impact on all of us. And what it comes down to is, what are the areas in your life that you kind of struggle to show up in? So Steve, you mentioned and alluded to the fact that we're terrified of heights, and we're terrified of heights. It's awful.
Yeah.
But I think that that's just one thing we're terrified of. Like, I'm terrified of podcasting, man. I run the Strive for More podcast, and every single episode before I interview someone, I'm terrified. It scares the heck out of me because it's hard to put yourself out there. And so the alter ego effect is all about kind of changing your mindset. And change is hard, but shifting is easy. And really, the alter ego effect is about shifting your mindset and rewiring neural pathways, because, you know, we think the same thought over and over again. I'm scared of heights. I'm scared of heights. I'm scared of heights. And that connection in your brain just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. So that just reinforces. And so really the idea here is just kind of changing those neural pathways. And the way that you do that is you come up with literally an alter ego. So Superman was an alter ego. Batman was an alter ego. This is somebody that you can change into to overcome these challenges. And so, for example, rock climbing, you know, I picture myself as the best rock climber in the world. And I name him. I'm not going to go into it too much specifically, but just to kind of give you an example of it, it's, you know, you picture yourself as this famous rock climber, and you use a totem to kind of switch into that. And a totem is like Superman's cape, for example, or it's Batman's Batmobile. It is something that when you see it, it triggers that mental emotional switch into that alter ego. And then you've kind of got to, the final step is you've got to fight back against that version of yourself that you don't really like. And so, for example, the enemy, exactly. There's got to be an enemy. Batman had the Penguin, the Joker. Yeah, totally. Heath Ledger, for example. And so, yeah, there's got to be that version of yourself that you're fighting against. And the version of myself that I fight against when I rock climb is that version that is terrified of falling, of dying, of getting hurt, of heights. And I think if you can kind of combine all of those things into that alter ego effect, then you're going to shift into somebody over time that is very different than who you are now. And every time you use that alter ego, it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And so I think that, Steve, we've noticed in our climbing that it's something that, you know, makes a difference right away, but it makes a bigger difference the 20th time you use it as opposed to the first time.
Oh, absolutely. I'll add two things that I want to touch on that you brought up there that was super beneficial. Is if you get in repetition of failing and putting yourself in there, repetition repeats itself. So if you get in that spot and you just give up, if you keep giving up, you're naturally going to, everything you approach, you have that giving up mentality. So it's really good when you hit that wall that this is a growth opportunity, that we can either come out of it better, we can fail forward, or we can choose to fail ourselves without making that move to see if we had landed or not. And I think that was really a good perspective that you put onto it too, is perception is almost everything. Another thing I want to add on, I'm going to put in a link in the description here, guys, for you guys. You have to check out this guy's podcast. He has been interviewing top CEOs around the world. Some really valuable tips. I just listened to the Blue Jays. What was his name again? Interview?
Michael Krause.
They really dive into really cool psychology things about failing forward in that interview as well. So I'd highly recommend going and check out that podcast. Make sure you subscribe to his podcast as well, because I know it's super beneficial as well. Thanks, for you guys. I'll also put a link in the description about the Strive men's group. So anybody who is a man, I guess, or a male entrepreneur and want to learn more about Strive, or if you're a woman and you want to know a little bit more about it as well, I'll put that down below. And there'll be Jared's bio here, because I didn't touch on all of his amazing things that he's done. But before we wrap this up, Jared, I have a question for you. And I've always wanted to know, it's like, you obviously set your goal to accomplish the marathon. How'd you do it from a systematic approach to figure out how much dedication and effort you need to put in per week to make sure that you hit that goal?
Oh, I have nothing tactical to add here, but I've just been trying to add 5 kilometers a week. So I started at 20 and it was heinously hard, and did 25 last week, and I did 30 yesterday. And I'll just keep going till I get to 50 and hope I can get the extra 5 kilometers when I do 55 in August.
That is a systematic approach, like 5 each time. That does work. And I know you've been putting in a lot of hours and working really hard as well to go into it. So I know you're going to crush it. I think I do have one more question for you, Jared, before we sign off. Is I want to know if you could break down, and this is a big question. This whole show is about life and business hack show, right? So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this one. If you can narrow it down to what is one massive principle, one topic, or one thing that has changed your life and business, and it continues to change your life and business almost on like a daily or weekly, that you need to do this to make sure that you're getting to that new reality of yourself. Because one thing you said earlier that I'd like to rephrase is looking back at yourself as a reflection and being embarrassed with that. I'm writing that down right now too, because that was a super big nugget. If you guys missed that, you need to go back, watch it, and listen to how he actually does it, because that's huge. So that I already took that one away. But if you could come up with one life or business hack show tip for everybody in the audience here, what would it be that you almost do daily?
Well, that's a great question, Steve. I think my big focus recently is how do we make meaning every single day? And I've combined a book called Atomic Habits. I think the author's James Clear, and I've already screwed up Todd Herman's name, so there's a chance that I've screwed this up too. But I think it's James Clear, and he writes about how do we make habits stick. And so in reading that, in kind of simultaneously with this search for meaning, I came up with the idea of combining the two of them. And so how do we make meaning habitual? So what I mean by that is, what are the things that we can actually do that at the end of our lives not only make us happier and more satisfied and more fulfilled, but give us a sense of meaning? And so I did a lot of research on the topic to find out what are those habits that we can do that actually move the needle. It's not just a cold bath to take a cold bath, because I think a lot of us maybe get sick of this kind of focus on the next hot thing. Is it, you've got to take a cold shower every single morning? Well, does that actually work? Does that actually make you happier at the end of your life? And the answer is really no, it doesn't. What actually matters is relationships. What actually matters is love. What actually matters is finding meaning in suffering. And so every single day, what I do is I've got this routine of habits, and it's a 6-week program that I'm building up to finally get to my end state of full habits. Because in the book, Atomic Habits, he recommends that you kind of start small, because we all know if you try to go to the gym 7 days in a week, your first week, you're never going to go back to the gym.
Yeah.
And so I do 8 things every single morning. One of them is I drink a liter of water with salt and lemon. I get exposure to blue light. I journal for 5 minutes. I meditate for a couple of minutes. I take a couple of minutes of silence. I stretch. I exercise. I focus on relationships. I've been creating a list of the people that matter the most to me, so that I can schedule time into my days to reach out to those people and just say, hey, I care about you. I'm thinking about you. Because I think a lot of us just let those relationships go when they're actually the most meaningful things that we can do. So I do have an end state that I'm kind of working toward. And this kind of process is allowing me to find literally meaningful habits that I can do every day for the rest of my life.
I love that. Habits definitely define, especially if you're disciplined enough, it's definitely going to project you even further there. So I love that tidbit.
Well, and Steve, I want to say how much I've learned from you on the habitual front. I know you as somebody that is probably the most routine-based and organized person that I've ever met. And so you really inspired that journey for me. And so kudos to you for that. And thank you, Steve.
Well, thanks for the shout out. I definitely didn't take it to the next level like you do. You definitely have the processes laid out. I'm just another thing I'd like to add to the audience is you find out what works for you as well. It's like what blue light does to Jared could do something different to somebody else. It's like, what do you find that sets you up to bring your best self every day? And Jared's found his, he's fooling around with it. So it's finding out what's best for you. My question is, have you noticed a big difference from when you weren't doing the atomic habits to now? Like how has that dramatically helped you from a mental, spiritual, physical space?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one that I always think about is how do we know that what we're doing actually matters, and how do we measure that? And so, yeah, again, from that Todd Herman book, you passed it on to me. It's a mental health checklist to kind of give you a number on a scale of 0 to 100 and how you're doing mentally. And so, I fill that out weekly, and I've noticed a huge, huge improvement in my happiness, in my meaning, in just my general kind of well-being. So yeah, I know that those are working for me, and I think that they would work for most people as well.
Do you have like, we'll just put down in the link in the bio here, just some morning habits that people can be using just to optimize their day as well?
For sure. Yeah, I can share those with you. And Steve, for any of your listeners that might be interested in the things that I've said, just maybe you can kind of find a way for them to reach out to me. You can post my website there, and they can contact me through that. But if anybody wants to just have a discussion on how to create these principles for yourself, or what that morning routine looks like for me, like I'll just offer that for free for anybody that wants to do it and kind of share ideas and get better as a whole, because I really respect and admire what you're doing with this program. And I think that I'm honored to be here, like I said earlier, and keep up the great work, man.
Well, very kind words, my friend. No, this is what I was planning on doing this anyways, is I'm going to leave it open in that people can comment in the bottom. I haven't asked you yet, but if somebody asks you a question, so you guys can ask Jared any questions, or you can go to his website or his social media handles if you want and ask him a question. If it's a question to me, I'll answer it. But just let us know how you enjoyed the interview. If you got value out of it, what was your top takeaway? And I'll make sure Jared knows exactly how that went. And he can respond back to the question as well. So I'm putting him on the spot here for you guys. You will be able to get in contact with him. So I think that wraps up the Life and Business Hack Show. I just want to say thank you so much, Jared, for taking the time out of your day to join us here to add value. I'm just super thankful that you came on today. And thanks, man. Thanks for sharing.
Steve, thank you for having me. Keep doing this. We all need more of this, Steve.